And, sweetheart, how's life in that apartment I gave you? John Anderson raised his glass and smiled warmly from across the table at Aspen Lodge, a restaurant in downtown Denver. His voice was cheerful, like this was just another family dinner filled with laughter and stories. His eyes, rimmed with wrinkles, sparkled with pride, and his gray beard twitched slightly as he took a sip. I hadn't seen Grandpa in 10 years. He'd been living abroad, and now he was finally back, only to completely throw me off with that one question. I froze. My fork, with a piece of meat on it, hung mid-air, never reaching my mouth. The water in my glass trembled under the chandelier's light. The air in the room thickened, like right before a thunderstorm. Mom, sitting across from me, slowly lowered her spoon, her perfectly painted lips parting in surprise. Dad, next to her, dropped his spoon with a clang that sliced through the silence like a knife. My younger sister Emma glanced up from her phone, fingers frozen mid-scroll, her usually disinterested gaze now locked on me. Even the waiter passing by with a tray slowed down, sensing the tension. Apartment? I repeated, my voice unsteady no matter how hard I tried to stay calm. I set my fork down, wiped my sweaty palms on the napkin in my lap, and looked at Grandpa. John, I live in a rented basement apartment. His smile faded like a candle snuffed out by wind. The light in his eyes dimmed, and his brows pulled together, forming a deep crease on his forehead. He set his glass down, the clink of glass on wood barely audible. What do you mean, basement apartment? He asked quietly, but his voice had steel in it. I straightened up. Grandpa had always been kind, but I knew that tone. That was the no-nonsense tone. The moment when jokes ended. I swallowed hard, feeling the eyes of everyone at the table stuck to me like I was some museum exhibit. Mom glanced at Dad, her fingers nervously clutching the edge of the tablecloth. Dad stared into his plate like it held escape instructions. Emma, for once, wasn't thinking about her social media, her mouth hung open. I never got any apartment, I said louder, trying to keep my voice level while my insides boiled. For 4 years now, I've been renting a basement from a woman who smokes so much the walls are stained yellow. There's a boiler next to my bed that hums all night. The windows, barely slits under the ceiling, let in hardly any light. Silence crashed down, heavy and deafening. My blood pounded in my temples, and my heart thumped in my throat. John stared at me, then slowly turned to my father. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white like a man bracing for battle. Michael, he said, and each word landed like a rock, I gave you the money 4 years ago. $200,000. I told you it was for Ann, to help her start her life after college. You told me you handled everything. That she was living in a cozy apartment downtown. Dad coughed and reached for his glass, but his hand shook so badly water spilled on the tablecloth. He quickly dabbed it with a napkin, but nothing could save him from Mom's stare. She turned to him, lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes full of horror and disbelief. Michael, she whispered, barely audible, you told me you helped Ann find a sweet little place downtown. You showed me pictures. Said she was happy. I stared at my father, waiting for him to say something. That it was a mistake. That the money got lost. That this was all a misunderstanding. But he said nothing. And his silence was louder than any scream. His usually confident face now looked gray, like a cement wall. Dad, I said, my voice like a January wind, sharp and cold, you never gave me anything. No apartment. No money. Not even advice. You just kept telling me to work harder, said I was lazy, that I shouldn't expect handouts. And I didn't. I worked 2 jobs just to afford that basement. Emma gasped, her manicured hand covering her mouth, her nails catching the light. Mom stared at Dad like she didn't recognize him. And Grandpa, he leaned back in his chair as if someone had struck him. His usually kind face now looked shattered by pain and fury. And, he began, but I cut him off. Something inside me snapped. Something I had held back for years. I didn't come here to say any of this. I didn't want to ruin your birthday, John. But since we're all here, let's stop pretending everything is fine. I'm tired. Tired of the lies. Tired of the silence. Tired of being invisible. I stood up. The chair scraped against the wooden floor, loud as thunder in my ears. I'm leaving. I walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Behind me came the sounds of footsteps, clinking dishes, muffled voices. Someone, maybe Mom, called after me, but I didn't stop. I wasn't crying. I wasn't broken. I was burning. With a fury I had buried for too long. The wind whipped my cheeks, Denver's cold biting into my skin, but I didn't feel it. What I felt was power, the power of finally speaking the truth. In the parking lot, I heard Grandpa's voice behind me. And, wait. John was running after me, his coat flapping, his breath visible in little puffs. He looked older now, smaller. His shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with grief. You really never got the apartment? I shook my head, my throat tightening. I rent a basement from a woman who doesn't trust banks and only takes cash. It reeks of mildew and cigarettes. The bed's next to the boiler. My desk is a fruit crate. Most nights I eat on the floor. The only light comes through cracks near the ceiling. I've gotten used to it, but it's not living. It's surviving. He swallowed hard. His face had gone gray, like the asphalt under our feet. He rubbed his beard like he was trying to make sense of it all. Your father told me you didn't want help. That you were doing your own thing. That you were ungrateful. That you lived in your own little dream world and didn't even say thank you. I let out a bitter laugh, sharp and hollow. I didn't know what to thank him for. Once, I asked him for a contact to find a job. He said, start by washing dishes. Builds character. When I asked for help with rent, he said I needed to tough it out, that I was spoiled. John ran a hand down his face like he could erase the words I just said. His fingers trembled. For the first time, I saw how much he had aged. I want to see where you live, he said suddenly, his voice firm despite the shake. Why? I asked, crossing my arms. Because if everything you said is true, and I believe you, then your father didn't just lie to you. He lied to me. And I won't let anyone lie to me again. That same night, I drove Grandpa to my place. Denver's skyline glittered behind us, the city buzzing with life. But my world was dim. We pulled up to an old 5-story building on the edge of town, where the streetlights flickered and the pavement was cracked. I led him down the concrete steps to a basement door. The bulb above it flickered, casting shaky shadows on the chipped paint. The steps were slick with damp. Welcome to my palace, I said, unlocking the door. The smell of mildew and cigarettes hit me like always, only tonight it felt even more suffocating. I stepped inside, holding the door for Grandpa. John entered, his footsteps echoing in the cramped space. He looked around, the beat-up couch I bought on Craigslist for $100, the crooked shelf made from mismatched planks, the ceiling stained with mold, the bed shoved up against the humming boiler. His eyes paused on the crate I used as a table, the stack of plates on the floor beside a worn-out book, the only thing I allowed myself to buy. The narrow slits near the ceiling I called windows let in the dim glow of a street lamp, but it only made the room look sadder. He was quiet for a few seconds, then sat down on the edge of my bed. The mattress creaked under his weight. His sigh was so deep, it felt like he exhaled a lifetime. This is where you live, he said. Not a question. A fact. His voice trembled, but it wasn't weak, just full of pain. Since I finished school, I said, crossing my arms to hide how much my hands were shaking. For 4 years, I worked as a waitress, then in a call center. Sometimes I cleaned apartments. All just to pay for this place. His eyes shimmered, but he didn't let the tears fall. He ran a hand through his beard, his fingers clenching the fabric of his coat. Your father told me he kept the rest of the money for your wedding. I thought that was smart. That you were living in a nice place, and he was just thinking about your future. There is no rest, I said, my voice flat and lifeless. John looked down, then back at me. His eyes were filled with resolve. "That's enough," he said, rising to his feet. His voice was steady as granite. "Tomorrow we're going to the bank. And to a lawyer. And then your father is going to answer for all of this." I nodded, but something shifted inside me. Not fear, not hope, something in between. The feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of burnt coffee and John's voice on the phone. He stood in the hallway of my basement apartment, his frame too big for the narrow space. His voice was like ice. I'd never heard him speak like that. "I don't care that it's Sunday, Robert. Get the paperwork. I want to know where every dollar went. And prepare a letter. Michael no longer has the authority to handle anything tied to my finances. Yes. Right now." I stood barefoot on the cold concrete floor, listening. My old sleep shirt was faded, the print barely visible, but I didn't feel vulnerable. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as the lazy or weak and people thought I was, but the real one. The one who kept fighting even when no one noticed. By noon, we were at a bank in downtown Denver. The office was spotless, wood paneling, expensive coffee in the air. The banker, a woman in her 50s in a sharp suit, typed with tight lips, as if she already knew this wasn't going to end well. "Here," she said at last, adjusting her glasses. "A transfer from your account, John, to Michael Thompson. Labeled as a gift to and for an apartment. $200,000. Dated 4 years ago." She turned the monitor toward us. Date. Amount. Everything matched. Then she clicked again, and my stomach dropped. 5 days later, my dad had transferred the entire amount to another account under his own name. No note. No mention of me. Nothing. The money hadn't been spent, but it never reached me. It just sat there, in his account, like a trophy. John stared at the screen. His face was stone, but his hands trembled. "Print it," he said quietly, but with a tone that made the woman nod immediately. "All of it. Every line." When she stepped out, he turned to me. "He stole from you. Didn't spend it, but hid it. And lied to me. This isn't just a family dispute, and it's a crime." I nodded, but something inside me boiled. I remembered the way Dad looked at me when I asked for help. How he said I needed to toughen up. That I was too soft for the real world. Meanwhile, he held my money, my chance, on his own account. "Don't worry," John added, resting his hand on my shoulder. "I'll take care of it." "No," I said softly but firmly. "We'll take care of it." That same day, we drove to my parents' house. I hadn't been there in years. The same 2-story home on the edge of Denver. Neat lawn. White picket fence. The same house where I used to bake cupcakes with Mom. Where Dad taught me to ride a bike before he started ignoring my calls. Where Emma threw a party after I moved out and dumped my boxes of books on the lawn because they were in her way. John rang the doorbell. Dad answered. His face was a mix of irritation and surprise. When he saw both of us, he froze. His hand stuck on the doorknob. "We need to talk," Grandpa said, his voice solid as rock. "I'm busy," Dad muttered, but John cut him off. "Sit down." He didn't raise his voice, but there was something in his tone that made even Dad obey. He stepped back and let us in. Mom stood in the living room doorway, her eyes flicking between me and Grandpa. Emma peeked from the stairs, her messy bun wobbling, her eyes gleaming like a cat sensing drama. We sat down in the living room on the couch I remembered from childhood. It was still soft, but now felt foreign. John placed a folder of documents on the coffee table. Dad didn't even glance at it. His hands were clenched. His eyes fixed on the floor. Grandpa opened the folder and began. "You told me and was living in the apartment I bought her. $200,000, my savings. Years of work. But the money never reached her. You took it. Hid it. Lied to me. Lied to your daughter. Dad gave a nervous chuckle, his fingers tapping on his knee. Dad, you're blowing this out of. She lives in a basement. Grandpa snapped, and his voice made everyone freeze. Even Emma stopped on the stairs, her phone hanging by her side. She eats on the floor. Works 2 jobs to afford that dump. And you hid her money so you could keep it for yourself. I was saving it for her future, Dad started, voice tight, trying to spin his way out. And wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. I wanted her to learn to appreciate. Don't, I interrupted, my voice sharp as a blade. Don't lie. You called me lazy. Said I didn't deserve help. You made me feel worthless. Meanwhile, you kept my money. My chance. My life. You didn't spend it, but you didn't give it either. Why? Mom whispered, her voice trembling. Michael, tell me it's not true. Dad said nothing. His jaw tightened, his eyes darted around the room, but he didn't meet anyone's gaze. John slid the papers toward him. I spoke to a lawyer. We can take this to court. But you're returning every dollar. And you'll explain yourself in front of the whole family at the next dinner. No more hiding behind your excuses. Dad clenched his jaw but said nothing. John turned to me, his eyes softening. You're moving in with me next week. I already called a realtor. We'll find you a proper place. Don't argue. I looked at Dad, the same man who once told me I'd never make it without him. Now he looked small, crushed under the weight of truth. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. And that was better. The next Sunday dinner was at the same restaurant, at the same table, but everything had changed. I sat beside John, at the head of the table. His hand rested lightly on mine as we waited for the others. Dad walked in, and I barely recognized him. He looked older. His shoulders slumped. The usual confidence he wore like armor had vanished. Mom stuck close to him, lips tight, eyes red like she'd been crying all night. Emma wore dark sunglasses like she was trying to hide, but her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her sweater. John stood before anyone could make small talk about the weather or the menu. Despite his age, he stood tall, and his voice carried through the room, making even the waiter freeze mid-pour. I'll keep it brief, he said, his words sharp as a blade. I brought you here because last week, I found out about an injustice committed in my name. 4 years ago, I sent money, my life savings, to help and start her adult life. I was told she got it. That she was doing well. That was a lie. The room fell silent. My eyes stung, but I held back. This wasn't about tears. This was about truth. John continued. Michael took that money. He hid it in his own account. He didn't spend it, but he didn't give it to her either. He made her feel unworthy, lazy, dependent, while pretending to be a caring father. He lied to all of us. Aunt Helen gasped and covered her mouth. My cousin Daniel blinked, his face turning serious, like he was just now understanding what this was really about. Dad shifted in his seat, fingers gripping a napkin, eyes locked on the floor. John looked at him. You betrayed both of us. From this moment on, you won't see a cent of my estate. Everything will be rewritten. And you will answer to everyone. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his jacket pocket and placed it in front of Dad. Read it. Out loud. Dad looked at the paper like it was poison. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. His voice cracked on every word, and I could see how hard it was for him. To my family. I stole from my daughter Anne. I took money meant for her future and hid it. I hurt her, my father, and the honor of our family. I take full responsibility and will return the full amount within 6 months. I am deeply sorry. When he finished, there was nothing but silence. No applause, no gasps, just heavy breaths, like the whole room exhaled at once. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. My pain, my years of struggle, finally acknowledged. That night, standing on the porch of John's house, I looked up at the stars. Denver slept below, its lights twinkling in the distance. The sky was so clear, it felt like I could reach out and touch the stars. Grandpa stood next to me, his coat buttoned all the way up, hands tucked in his pockets. "I still can't believe you never asked for anything," he said quietly, his voice gentle, almost guilty. "I got tired of asking," I said, staring at the sky. "I thought if I worked hard enough, if I proved I was worth something, someone would notice. But no one did. Except you." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I'm sorry I didn't check sooner. I should have made sure the money got to you." "I'm not sorry," I said after a pause, my voice firm. "If things had been different, I wouldn't know who's truly on my side. Now I do." He gave a faint smile, his eyes glinting under the porch light. "You're never going back to that basement. I found you a place downtown, hardwood floors, real windows, and a view of the South Platte River." I laughed softly, and the sound felt light and real. "That already sounds like a palace." "You deserve it," he said, and something in his voice made me believe him. Maybe I did deserve it. But more than anything, I deserved to stop scraping by. I deserved to be heard. The new apartment was on the 6th floor of a building with huge floor-to-ceiling windows. That first morning, I woke up to sunlight flooding the room like a river. There was no barking dog, no clanking pipes, no smell of mold. Just silence, soft and warm like a blanket. I sat on the edge of my new bed, not a saggy old mattress, but a real bed with a wooden frame, and looked out at the city. The sky over Denver was so big I wasn't used to it. It felt endless, like the dreams I'd hidden for so long. That day, I did something I'd been putting off for years. I opened my laptop and found an old folder buried behind bills, resumes, and rejection letters. A folder labeled Design. It held sketches of interiors, layouts, ideas I'd drawn late at night when I couldn't sleep because of the boiler's hum. Drawings I once showed Dad back when I still believed he might support me. Back when he said, "It's cute, but when are you going to get serious? Design's not a job, it's a hobby." Well, now I was serious. I updated my portfolio, sent it to design studios, signed up for freelance platforms, and launched a small website. The money Dad returned? I didn't just use it for rent and living, I used it to build something. I bought a graphics tablet, paid for courses in modern design software, and invested in advertising my work. This was my shot, and I wasn't going to waste it. Weeks passed. Then months. I worked late into the nights, creating mock-ups for clients who found me through the site. My projects were small, remodeling studio apartments, designing kids' rooms, redoing office spaces. But each one was a step forward. I learned how to talk to clients, defend my ideas, and ask for what I was worth. I learned how to believe in myself. One afternoon, I got a call. A Denver architecture firm, Rocky Mountain Design, had seen my work on one of the platforms. They were launching an affordable housing project for young families and were looking for a designer who could make small spaces feel warm and functional. "We need someone who understands what it's like to live with limits," the director said during the interview, a man with thick eyebrows and a kind smile. "Your work shows you know how to make a small space feel like home." "I do," I replied, looking him in the eye. "I lived in a basement for 4 years. I know how to turn a corner into a bedroom. And a fruit crate into a table." He nodded, and I saw respect in his eyes. When I walked out of their office with the contract in my hand, I was wearing the same coat my mom once called cheap and childish. Now, it felt perfect. This wasn't just a contract, it was proof. Proof that I wasn't the failure people thought I was. That the basement hadn't defined me. That I could create, dream, and live. 6 months later, I hosted a dinner. Not at a restaurant. Not at someone else's house. In my own apartment, where the air smelled like fresh coffee and warm bread. The table was set with real plates I'd bought on sale, but to me, they were more beautiful than anything in a fancy place. Sunlight poured through the windows, bounced off the hardwood floors, and the room filled with the warmth of laughter. John brought a bouquet of daisies and placed them in the vase I'd bought with my first paycheck. He looked at me with pride, his eyes shining just like they did the first time he saw my apartment. Daniel, my cousin, who used to roll his eyes whenever I mentioned design, was now asking about color palettes and how to pick wallpaper that made a room feel bigger. Aunt Helen, who rarely spoke at family gatherings, suddenly said she wanted to hire me to redo her lake house. Even Emma, usually glued to her phone, set it aside and asked to see my sketches. Dad wasn't there. He had returned the money on time, just like he promised in his letter. $200,000 went back into John's account, and he used them to buy me this apartment. But Dad's apology remained on paper. He called a few times, tried to explain, said he wanted what was best, that he was scared I wouldn't make it, but I didn't want to hear it. Not out of anger, but because I realized something. His words didn't have power over me anymore. His absence was the greatest gift he could have given me. As I passed around a tray of appetizers, I caught John's gaze. He was watching me with a soft smile, his hand resting on the table next to the vase of daisies. "This," he said quietly, "just for me, this is what I dreamed of when I sent that money. For you to really live, and..." I touched his hand, my fingers still warm from holding my teacup. I said, my voice soft but steady. "I really am." I looked around at the guests, the sunlight streaming through the windows, the daisies in the vase. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was home. Not just in this apartment, not just in Denver, but in my life. A life I built myself, step by step, from broken dreams and hard-won truth.